pests are good to couple. So that's something else we want to look at when it comes to diversity. Okay, next slide.
Got it.
Yes.
You know, it's easy to appreciate the beneficial plants, but it's really hard to appreciate the non-beneficial plants.
Right.
You know, that they have their role too, like weeds and whatnot. And that's actually kind of hard to work that into my daily life, but it's humbling.
Well, what I did is with a number of the non-beneficial plants, and I'll be having a workshop on this coming up. I believe it's the 21st of September. I'm doing a workshop on medicinal plants, and a lot of these plants that you think are weeds are actually beneficial in their own way. This is just ancient indigenous knowledge that has been, overlooked for such a long time. So, do some research and determine what's beneficial and what's not beneficial before you start weeding out the plants.
But there's also the consideration of what may be a weed. You can look at the whole system. So maybe that particular plant doesn't belong in your yard right now because you have these other things that you're trying to cultivate. You don't want to cultivate the other thing, just like we cultivate certain behaviors and don't cultivate others. It's the same thing. You know that all over San Antonio, this particular plant is all over the place. So maybe it's okay to get rid of it in your yard and integrate something else. And if you keep having trouble with it, then you work through solutions for that. Next slide, please. Using natural edges and the margins. One of the things that permaculture loves to do is to create additional edges. So, as we said, instead of like a row crop, we make circles and spirals and curves. Because in nature, we find that a lot of plant life and animal life occurs in curves. There's no square shapes that are just exactly square. So by using more curves, we create more surface area that we can use to grow more things and to allow nature to interact with each other, because much of life happens at the edges. If you look at some of the most diverse communities, like the ocean, right at the tide pools, you have a whole heap of diversity that isn't there either on the land or in the deep sea. If you look at the edge of a great coral reef, there are so many. There's one thing in there, it's where the coral reef has an edge with the ocean, and that diversity becomes a huge place right there. So by looking at places where we can create edge, then we can create more diversity in our gardens and in our home life and in our interactions with other people. Think about edges in your own life. Who are you interacting with on a regular basis? Is it just one community, or do you find yourself blending when you have a certain edge? Like if you are a permaculturalist in the Army, do you have a certain edge where you interact with people a little bit differently than if you were a permaculturalist at a nonprofit organic foods co-op? There are different ways that you can find yourself at a border and to create a more enriched life. Next slide, please. Vision is not seeing things as they are, but as they will be. That's at the very basic of everything. Vision, without vision, the people will perish. And this is a biblical principle, but nevertheless, it's important to, as you go through designing your life in the principles of permaculture, you look and see what you'd like to create, and you move towards that, and you create the plan, and you observe, and you interact. And as we said at the beginning, all these principles intertwine with each other, and once you pick one up and say, I'm going to focus on this one principle, it's hard not to include all the other ones that go along with it. So look in your life and see what ways that you can make a positive impact, ways that you can change your personal environment, and see where that blends, because you have edges in your life as well as you have edges in your garden, as well as edges in your communities. Next slide, please. Permaculture flower. It begins with ethics and design principles, like I said, and then it bleeds over into the rest of our culture and the rest of our lives. So that's something to always keep in mind. Next slide, please.
So those are the basic ethics and values of permaculture. It's something that starts off small and intensive at your home, but eventually the same principles of permaculture can create a more sustainable world. So once we start off with the basic understanding of how to approach our world from a permaculture point of view, then we want to look at specific applications. How can we apply these theories and these tools towards making the overall world a more sustainable place? So here we look at land and nature stewardship, bio-intensive gardening, forest gardening. That's basically where you develop a garden that is self-maintaining. I call it lazy farming because it grows by itself naturally. Seed saving. One of the problems that we've been running into lately is large companies like Monsanto buying patents and eliminating seeds. So that's something else we want to do. These are just a few. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll make sure everyone gets this presentation via email at a later time. Another thing is we want to look at building, how to develop your buildings based on passive solar designs, looking at building your homes with nature, natural construction material like straw bale. Straw is something that farmers usually just burn because they can't do anything with it. But you can actually use that to build very sturdy structures. So this is another list of ideas that you can use to apply permaculture. Next slide, please. Okay, tools and technology. So when we look at permaculture and sustainability, again, if we're going to start off on a small scale, we don't necessarily need a huge backhoe. Sometimes they come in handy if we're building a dam or if we're building a pond or swells. But we want to get an idea of what tools can we make, what tools can we recycle, what tools can we use that are sustainable. For example, bicycles and electric bikes. I know here in San Antonio that's kind of difficult because of the 100+ days of summer that we've been experiencing recently. But these are just a few of the tools that we can utilize to make our world more sustainable. And what you do is basically take the ones that are appropriate for you, something that you're comfortable with. Because permaculture is not like a uniform philosophy for everyone to follow exactly. It's something that you look at and you basically make it fit your lifestyle because it's designed to enhance your lifestyle as well as enhance the community and make the world a more sustainable place.
Next slide, please. Education and culture. One of the things that's fundamental to permaculture and establishing a permanent culture is to educate people. And when we go out into the world and we find that maybe our ideals aren't reflected, we can take the power back to educate both our children and our families and our friends about things that are important to us so that we can spread that information. We can create an edge, if you will, of information and of our own values being put out into the world. So one of the values is homeschooling. You can also see social ecology, using the redesign of society. When we empower ourselves to redesign a small society, whether it be our meetup group of sustainable environmentalists in San Antonio, we can decide how we want to interact with each other. And that culture will bleed out into the rest of the culture as we go out into the world in our various worlds. Action learning, looking at different problems and really working